Hello, everybody, and guess who is with us today? It's Robert Robinson. And Robert, it's so exciting to have you today. I'm already into the conversation. I can't wait to start asking you. How are you?
Awesome. I'm great. I can't wait to get started as well. Doa, been looking forward to this interview, so I'm ready to go.
Awesome. And I'm sure everybody watching us are also waiting for this interview. And before we jump in, just to introduce Robert real quick for anybody who has not met him before, Robert Robinson is a futuristic, strategic, seasoned entrepreneur and transformational project leader, currently serving as president and chief transformation officer at the Project Leadership Group. With over 25 years of experience across industries like high tech, medical devices, insurance, and financial services, Robert has led more than 500 project terms and managed multi-million dollar initiatives with precision and purpose. His certified in portfolio and project management. So Robert is certified as a PfMP and PMP and brings deep expertise in IT governance, software engineering, and business strategy. Beyond the boardroom, Robert is a passionate community leader and youth sports coach committed to mentorship and leadership development. Robert works with a blend of science, of project management, and the art of transformation. He is empowering teams, inspiring accountability, and delivering outcomes that matter. Robert is the author and coach master of the IDX transformation methodology and is actively working on approaching high-end professionals to progressively help them in applying a revolutionary technique in adopting an ever-evolving positive change in these businesses and personal and professional lives. Robert, there's a big story that we need to share with your people here, and I just can't wait to ask you the first question about when you say that your top skills are in complex project management. I want to ask you, are all projects complex by definition?
Well, thanks for that question, Doa. I want to start by differentiating complex versus complicated. So, complicated projects are projects that are affected by external factors that are not objectively verifiable. So, maybe perhaps the project sponsor left before the project started, or the markets in a certain region have changed somewhat. So that makes a project complicated. But complex projects are affected by things like architecture. So you have a very complicated architecture internally in terms of the systems and the software and how it interacts. Uh, Complexity also can come from timelines if you have to deliver within certain constraints. So these are some of the factors that can make a project complex versus complicated.
So are you saying that complex projects are recognized as complex before you get started and versus complicated projects which should not have been, going through these kind of broad roadblocks, but happen to go into these roadblocks because of unplanned external factors?
Yes, well, complex projects, in my experience, the complexity is usually not exposed until you actually start the project, unfortunately. So it's only through elicitation and working with some of the experts in the organization that you start to expose the complexities in a project. You start to go into a little bit lower level detail, working with people like architects, working with some of the managers who have a specific expertise in certain areas, who then start to surface what the things that makes the project complex. I don't have but I don't have but 50% capacity on the areas that I need. So I cannot allocate the people on the project that you need to make it successful without the operation successful. There's 5 systems that need to integrate in order to make this work. We don't have enough integration engineers, or the technology has not been upgraded. So those are the type of problems that come up after you typically approve a project, but then they kind of find their way into the defining how long the project takes and how much the project is going to cost and the risk associated with the project. So all those factors determine the complexity of a project.
Wow. What's the superpower you need to have, Robert, in order to handle and manage complexity in projects?
I found that the superpower is facilitation, because as the project or program manager, I or my team may not have all the answers uh, to some of these questions, but the key is, number one, knowing who the players are. So the stakeholder management plays a big part. And then knowing how to bring people together and elicit their input in a way that exposes these complexities. And once they're exposed, then you can create plans around them. But as long as they're lurking behind the covers in someone's mind, or in a system someplace, you really cannot take action. So it's only through that elicitation and facilitation skill that becomes your superpower that you can expose the complexities.
Is it the people, Robert? Like when you say facilitation skills, are you talking about allowing people to collaborate together smoothly, understand each other? Like facilitation skills between like difficult personalities, or like people who just have different mindset?
Absolutely. That's a great point, because when it comes to project execution and project success, we're always focused on how much it costs, when it's going to be delivered. But at the end of the day, it's all about the people. The people have the expertise, the knowledge, the passion, and they're actually going to be one of the determining factors on whether the project is successful. So it's always best to consider the people, engage people, even if they're not directly on the project team, and ensure that the people are part of solving these complexities, so that when the project's delivered, you're not wondering why people, are not on board with the change itself.
Absolutely. Like facilitating between people is a big deal. And what is the superpower that you still need to be able to facilitate between people, Robert?
The superpower is being able to identify what is not said. So imagine you go through a lot of effort in determining who the right people are, bringing all the right people to the table, facilitating the meeting, and you leave with a group of 2 pages of notes and things that you know you need to do. But there are always things that are not said in the meeting. So that's a superpower that leads to, after the meeting, making another round with the key people and kind of further exposing or eliciting more feedback. Because you can also tell where some people are not contributing, but you know that person is an expert. You have to peel that back and understand what the reason for that is. So yes, understanding what's not being said is a superpower as well.
Wow. And even like recognizing that there is something that's not being said, that is super,
Yes.
I mean, that's very powerful. And what do you do when you find people so sort of resisting you? Because usually people, when they are experts and are not tapping into a conversation, they will have a good reason behind it. How do you break through and start, making them open up a little bit and start, speaking and contributing?
Well, the easy answer is relationship, but it's more complicated than that. Meaning, I think you have to try to understand a person's motivations and what their history is, because our history creates our actions and our emotions. So understanding if Jim has been on 3 projects like this before and they've all failed and they've made his job harder, that may not come out in the meeting, but you need a way to elicit that from Jim, right? Whether that's an offline meeting talking with Jim's manager. There's always more that's not being said.
Wow. Is it all about the conversations, the one-on-one or direct conversations or conversations which are about somebody who know them well?
It is. And one of my expertise is governance.
Hmm.
Governance is not about those conversations. By the time you come into a governance framework or structure and you want to make a decision, a lot of times decisions, if not already made, the conversations have already been had offline. So part of the art of stakeholder management and project success is knowing which of those meetings need to take place outside the governance structure, outside your project meetings, and where you build those relationships and you really start to expose those complexities.
Wow. And when you start like, working with a team and whether the project is complex or complicated, you're using your power scale, facilitating, recognizing what's not being said and making people engage actively. What would be the end result of successfully managing? Like, what would be the signs that the way that you're managing this complex project, you know, what are the signs? What would they be that you'd see in real life, tangible signs?
Well, there's a couple ways I want to answer that. One of the ways is the indicator that does not tell you whether the project is going to be successful is a green status. A lot of times, as project managers, we want to report everything as green because we don't want to alarm people. But as a leader, if I'm always getting feedback that the status is green, I know something's wrong. So the indicators that things are working well are a healthy level of conversation, a healthy level of conflict. I get nervous with a large transformational project if there is no conflict, if there's no stakeholder that wants to, just stop immediately and tells his people to stop contributing. If there's no one that says his people can't work past a certain time, if there's no one who's challenging the schedule, that makes me nervous. So I think involving the right people, you're going to get that feedback, and then you're going to be able to make adjustments, and you're going to be able to engage people. So that's kind of the way that I can tell whether it's working is that we have a healthy level of constructive conflict and criticism.
So if there is no conflict, it's not real.
Correct.
And if there is no conflict, people are not engaged enough.
That's what I find. And then that's one of the where we start to get into the art. You mentioned a word before about power skills. One thing I want to say is with the project leadership group with my company, one of the things that we believe and is known by some in the industry is that project management is not all about the science of knowing how to manage a schedule, um, the technical stakeholder and governance, right? There's an art of leadership that happens as well. So I think you have to always be balancing what the schedule says versus what the people say, right? What the green status says versus what the manager is saying in the meeting with the teams. So there's always this constant battle going on um, to make sure that you are monitoring the indicators of project success.
Yeah, and it's interesting how often you hear the line project is not a science, project management is an art, and you just wonder how many people would actually really understand and actually try to improve their skills in learning this art. Because I think art could be too abstract for some people, or like they don't know exactly what you're talking about. They agree, obviously.
That's right. That's why I gravitated toward when you use the term power skills, I think that's a way to manage that dissonance, right? Let's not call it an art, but there are skills that are not technical skills that are crucial to driving a successful project, especially a transformational program, which may be consuming a significant part of your operational or portfolio budget. It has a lot of eyes on it. You definitely need to use those power skills, but we don't have to call them art.
Yeah, yeah. If that's too abstract for some. Eh, Robert, like conflict will intimidate a lot of people, a lot of project managers. How come you're welcoming conflict? How come it doesn't intimidate you?
I think you're right. Conflict does make people nervous, but I think project managers are project managers for a reason. There's something in their identity that something early in their career people identified that they can deal with conflict, that they can facilitate under duress, and that they can still continue to get things done. So I think for the most part, if you're a PM and you're wearing that on your title, you're essentially saying that you know how to deal with conflict resolution. Because if you don't, you're not going to be very successful. There's a lot of times as project managers, we deal with pushback and we have to manage that equation because we don't have direct influence in a lot of cases. I'll give you one story. Early on in my career, when my first consulting job, I went in and I was on this revolutionary project. It was at the beginning of the cloud kind of evolution, and a company was taking their entire software infrastructure and making a cloud infrastructure. Well, I thought I knew everything about technology and project management, and I go in and I'm managing, and there's a CIO there, and something I did not read correctly about his input or his motivation. Something was off. I couldn't tell what it was. Well, one day I came in and I was fired. So that's a power skill, right? So it had nothing to do with what I knew about technology. It had nothing to do with my PMP. It had everything to do with my power skills and the art in the way that I manage that stakeholder. So that was a lesson to me that it's not always about the science. It's also about the art.
Yeah, it's got a lot of um intuition into it and a lot of reading in between the lines and behind the scenes and a lot of body language reading. It is beyond science. Totally agree with you.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Uh, and same goes with transformation. Most of the people will be intimidated the moment you start saying change or let alone, I mean, transformation. That will intimidate most of the people out there. And this is where I want to go back and ask you, since you are an expert in portfolio management, first of all, like what does portfolio management mean?
Portfolio management is, I'm going to use these words throughout the conversation. Portfolio management is the art of decision making. So essentially, it's almost like project management, but it's very honed in on decision making and it's very adjacent to financial management. So just imagine, I'll give an example. Let's say you have a household. Let's say there's two people in the household and you have a certain amount of money coming in. You have to figure out how much you're going to spend on the groceries, how much you're going to spend on the college tuition or the high school tuition, how much on the cars. You have all of these, you know, I'll call them investments, and you have to figure out how to allocate those investments. And on one hand, you would think, well, the more resources I have, the easier it is, but actually that makes it more difficult. So portfolio management is wrapping a science around how do we determine all the investments that are required in a given period, 12 to 18 months. And then how do we, as an organization, make decisions about those investments, how and when we invest, how we allocate resources to those projects. And that's what portfolio management is. Now, there's also a higher level of power skills there because you always have these discussions with the portfolio leaders. So if I'm marketing, I may be saying, well, I never get the allocation of the projects that I need because Sally over there in IT is always implementing something huge and she gets the money. And then you got the product development person saying, well, if I don't build what this company needs, none of you guys will be working. And then the salesperson is saying, if you don't put my CRM in, none of you guys will be working because I sell everything that you build.
Yeah.
So you have to always manage this equation as well as the decision-making process.
Wow, that really that's tough. That's not easy. Are you saying that um, it's imperative to actually practice and deeply understand portfolio management before you can even indulge in transforming an organization?
I think portfolio management is the engine of transformation, meaning, and again, we're talking about digital transformation, of course. You have to really hone in on that portfolio management aspect of a transformation before it can be successful. Because there's lots of unintended consequences. So, for example, if I'm implementing a huge, I'll keep using CRM as an example, CRM system, and it's gonna take maybe 10-15% of my overall budget
Okay.
portfolio, and it's gonna be global. And I had to stop an infrastructure project to do it. Well, I may have not have thought about that in Asia, the infrastructure is not ready for the CRM that I want to put in, and it's going to make the salespeople's job more difficult. That's actually a portfolio issue, right? You need to have that risk and dependency identified in whatever your scientific process is. So, without that understanding, your transformation has a less chance of being successful. And even let's say you put the CRM in, those folks in Asia are not going to be happy. Does that mean that your transformation is successful? So this is the equation that you have to
Ah,
balance. This is kind of the landscape to manage.
are you saying that before you even start implementing transformation, say the board, like, room, they went through everything, they did their thing, they realized there has to be a transformation on XYZ, that before they rule this out, they have to go and make all of the team stakeholders or stakeholders in general, I mean, on board and as excited as they are before they even, you know, bring the teams together and dictate that there's going to be a change in XYZ. If they're not sold,
Well, there is that
it's going to
change
be
management
resistant.
aspect. There is that change management aspect that's important of how you communicate the change and how you create a commitment and a decision from everyone. But then there's also the practical aspects of how and when you fund other initiatives that are may not be a part of the one that you're discussing in the transformation.
What if there
But
are?
but to your point on the change management aspects, it's very plausible that you can implement a 2-year transformation, get all the technical things right. But if you didn't really realize that you made the sales team's job in Australia more difficult than it was before the transformation, you can actually question whether that transformation was successful. So that's that change management of getting everybody on board, like you're talking about, is making sure that you're solving. You may not be able to solve everyone's problem, but you need to solve the right problems for the company based on your priorities.
Yeah, and the team, they like they need to be on board with, do they need to give feedback even before the transformation starts, or
They do, and I've seen various strategies with that. When people would use surveys, um, they use different types of communication strategies. But yes, people do need to be on board. You can question the timing. That's part of that art. People need to be on board, but you need to manage when they're on board, right?
Mm.
Because if I go and try to get the sales team on board after I'm halfway through with the project, that's not going to go over as well as if I talk to them, 6 months before the project started, and I got all their input, and I had workshops with them, and I collected their input, and I showed them regularly how we were addressing their concerns. Those are two different ways of getting them on board. One would be significantly more successful than the other.
Yeah. And taking into consideration that resistance to change is just a part of human nature, I mean, the high level team will be aware that they have to filter a lot of clutter. Doesn't necessarily have to be a real problem. And like they have
That's
to go
right.
through a set of questions, right? Like before they really realize that this is a roadblock, this is not a roadblock, this is a roadblock.
Absolutely. And this is why, you briefly mentioned earlier that, I created this identity transformation coaching model. It really addresses a lot of what technology transformation requires, or any transformation, in terms of there's some steps that we all need to follow as an individual or as a group before we embark on a transformation. And that is one, making a decision, committing to whatever the change is. That is very important. And that's kind of what you were bringing up about getting people on board. It's very difficult to just say you made a decision without getting people on board. Once you get people on board, then you can actually commit to whatever that
Yes.
change is. Committing before you have the proper alignment within the organization is a mistake.
Why is identity transformation important before organizational transformation?
Well, identity transformation is all about understanding the origins of an individual, how they drive their behaviors and commitments to a change before they actually get into the change itself. And if you think about it, um, transformation is the identity is basically the culture of the organization. So when you make a technology change, you're going to make a culture change as well. So all the tenets that apply to
Wow.
the change of the identity of an individual, they also apply to the change of the culture of the organization. Because to use the CRM example,
Mm-hmm.
when you put in that new system, the way that that sales operations person works and the way that that salesman reports how he's closing leads is going to change. That's going to change his job. And it may, in some cases, change his identity and who he needs to become to achieve the goals that he has in front of him. So it's all connected.
Wow. And does the change need to happen, this identity change, does it have to happen before we even tap into the transformation that the organization needs? Or is it a process and it's going to be happening all throughout the process, but it's
It's
going
a
to start
process.
early on?
It's
It's
a
a process.
process. It's a process. Now, it's more a bit intense at the individual level, but there are strategies from an organizational perspective, change management strategies that you can use to ensure that you do have, like we talked about buy-in several times. There's different ways you need to get that buy-in so that people can feel they're part of the decision that's creating the change. Because those are the most um, hardy resistance you'll see to a change or a transformation is individuals who feel they were not part of the decision. And so they're asked to accept an identity that they did not choose.
Oh, can you say that again, Robert, just in case somebody who's listening just missed that?
Yeah. So if I'm a salesperson and you change the entire way that I do my work, you didn't ask me or consult me at all in your process, then you're now asking me to accept an identity for work that I did not choose. You're asking me to work in a way that I may or may not, I may be on board with it, but the fact that I was not included is going to create some sort of dissonance in the way that I do my job going forward.
Robert, that's so true. That's so real what you just said. So real. Uh, okay. when like imagining ourselves in a corporate context and say a corporation or an organization, they've studied and they realize they want to make some change or transformation. The moment they bring the teams together and start announcing this, hey, there is going to be a change. Now people will panic on a certain level, you realize. And I mean, it even gets worse when they say transformation. Like, why is the first idea that kicks in? This is going to be bad. Some people are going to be fired. Some people are going to, I mean, why is the idea of change and transformation? How did it become a bad idea? How did that happen?
I don't know that it became a bad idea. I think it's the nature of us as humans, and as it relates to change. And I think what we have to do is recognize this nature and use every tool we can to alleviate the anxiety that people feel around change, because it's going to happen. People are going to feel anxiety around change no matter how well you execute it. But it's just a matter of understanding that, providing places to park that anxiety or get in front of that anxiety, and using these strategies in your communication in the way that you work and plan. uh, I don't think you're going to be able to eliminate anxiety from change.
And is that something that the IDX identity transformation model resolves? Like this panic of that all hell will break loose and this is going to be the end. Like, does IDX, you know, coaching help people to embrace this kind of a new mindset?
It does. And IDX more specifically helps the coaches and managers who interact with people experiencing change. And it provides mental models and ways to anticipate what the person going through the change is experiencing, so that you can help them experience the change in the most meaningful way. So if it's a global transformation, one of the most effective ways to implement change is to have the managers on the ground of 5 to 10 people groups be familiar with identity transformation coaching and be able to help their teams through the change that they're going to experience.
Wow. I mean, I'm so curious. I'm so curious to know what is it. I mean, I'm sure that's something that's like, so so missing right now. What you're saying is like it's not going to be changing people just in terms of how they relate to their job experience. When you say identity transformation, that could also relate to the way they're experiencing their entire life.
It can. And no one's more close to that than the line managers. So imagine having your managers in your company trained in this methodology, and they're able to recognize when there are blockages that are happening with certain individuals in their team that have to do with work or may not have to do with work, but that they're able to help them through that for the uh, benefit of not only the individual, but for the company in terms of where the company is moving towards, especially if that's a transformation.
And do you feel people in the in the organizations, Robert, will sort of build on their self-esteem when they get that kind of recognition that it's important for the organization to influence me and my identity first, because like it sort of makes me feel that I matter before the organizational gets anything real. You got to take care of me as an employee, as a team member first, pay attention to me, so that can sort of reflect on the
That's absolutely true. And it ties back into your earlier question about resistance.
hmm,
Because if you influence the change in a way that you just mentioned, where you do focus on the individual, that individual becomes an advocate. And then they help influence other individuals toward the positive change that you're looking for.
wow. How far do you feel, Robert, companies have, went astray when it comes of paying attention just to that, like taking care of the individuals?
Well, I think companies do a good job of addressing individuals, but I really feel that my coaching model provides them with more tools to be more effective more consistently. I
Consistent.
think that the way that we think as humans, just like we talked about anxiety, would change the anxiety is going to be there. Understanding that, and then as a coach, being able to unlock a part of a person's mind to see or experience a change that's going to benefit them and the company is very valuable from a coaching standpoint. And I do believe a lot more corporations are seeing the value of um, implementing coaching as a part of their leadership DNA.
Wow. Um, uh, what would the stages be, Robert, when you're talking about the identity transformation? What could the stages be? I know you have multiple, programs and multiple systems, and you have a theory and you have an ideology and methodology. But like, if we in general discuss the stages that make sense for any transformation to actually really happen, what could these stages look like?
Well, I want to work back into that. So one of the things coaching is I think adopted in not only in executive business but in the larger community. But I think one mistake that people make is when they go into a coaching situation, if you want to achieve an outcome, a lot of people just go in with the objective of achieving that outcome. So if I want to change the way we implement our um, ticket intake system, I'll come up with a list of tasks I need to do. I'll come up with a plan, and then I'll jump on that plan and I'll just start executing tasks. That's how we execute change. Very seldom do we look at what's behind that change. So before jumping into that change, understanding what's the origin story? How do we get to the point of needing to change this system? Who are the people involved? What do I actually have to gain? What would the future look like with a new system? Working through all of those items first before we jump right into changing is very important, because what usually happens is that project has a risk of not being successful, not because the person is not a good PM or an implementer, but they nor their teams were ready for that change because they didn't have the full understanding of how to implement it based on their origin story, I call it, or what was actually required to become what they needed to become to attract the outcomes they were looking for.
Wow, and that completely ties into what you said in the beginning about what was not being said.
Exactly.
And that could cause the entire results to, hit a different level when it is ignored. People who
Yes.
are experts, people who are involved with the project. So for you, Robert, like what's the biggest passion that you have about what you do that will keep you propagating your mission and message for the coming decades that you can influence people with and inspire people with?
Well, I believe we've talked a lot about, and I talk a lot about organizations and projects and change and transformation in that context. And I do believe that organizations have to be change machines going forward. The pace of change that we're seeing today, whether it's sustainability or AI, whatever you can choose, the trend, corporations have to constantly be able to transform. And I believe that as individuals, we have to be able to transform. So I think we're in a period in our history where the success of us as humans is going to be directly related to our ability to learn how to transform. And I believe identity coaching is a part of that. I believe in helping people achieve transformation and change in their lives and helping corporations achieve transformation. And that's my passion. That's what keeps me going. And that's how I will maintain that momentum.